Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and all you lovely chaotic neutrals, to our new episode of Dragons and Diatribes. I am Ed, one of your co-hosts here, joined by Jared and Ethan. Say hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Alrighty, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about pantheons, the gods, somewhat in mythology, but I think we're going to be focusing this largely around how we can construct pantheons for our D&D games, how we're able to use that to affect the plot, just because it's it's pretty large facet of how your world develops, and it's something that you can take a lot of different ways. And we kind of want to talk about the different options that you have, the different ways you can contrive of gods in your world. Kind of talk about our own processes and sort of go from there. And yeah, just talk about whatever comes up as it comes up. So figured something that we could start with is kind of talk about, when we're DMing, what our own processes are, or what our processes have been for creating a pantheon. It just generally as it relates to world building and kind of what your goal is when you're setting out to create a pantheon, what you've done in the past. So we can get started if you want to lead us off, Ethan, kind of talk about what your process has been, kind of what you try to do when you make a pantheon.
Yeah, sure thing. So, first off, a little bit about my Pantheon building is I run very God and Pantheon heavy games. I like the idea of gods having churches, having organizations and structures built around worship of different deities and conflicting deities. It's not just like this god fought with this god, but even within the same organization conflict, um, or just like conflict of I like having kind of one-off things even too, where it's like this one group of people doesn't follow any of the gods on the pantheon; they follow something completely different. Um, so I really like the conflict, but also the like opportunity to build champions out of this, especially if you're running players with ties to deities, and they do not have to be clerics or paladins. I have a lot. I've played in a lot of campaigns where a lot of my players got boons or started following deities, and they had nothing to do with um, their background as a cleric or a paladin. They were fighters, rangers, mages, all kinds of stuff. So really like the idea of kind of playing into that. When I build pantheons, my number one thing is I like building them into the world that I've already made. So I think one of a big thing that a lot of people do is they're like, oh, the gods created everything. For a high DM level, for me, that's not the case. Usually, whatever planet or um, whatever you call it is if it's a planet or like one of the
A plane,
or
of
like a yeah,
existence.
or a plane or whatever it is, it was already there or it was in the process of being made and then something found it. Now that's not to say that the players don't know that. So it's not to say that they or their organizations they're a part of don't think that the gods created everything. It really depends on what the gods told their people, or what the people have interpreted since their gods have left. I've not run any campaigns yet where they have completely direct access. A lot of times that's in prehistory for my campaigns where the gods walked on alongside mortals. Um, that's not to say that I've never been asked to run a campaign where it's in that time period where the gods are fighting or not fighting and it's just kind of the deities are there. That'd be really interesting to explore, but I haven't done it. Usually that's in the past. So it could have been that the people when the gods were here knew that they didn't create the world, but that isn't to say that that's kind of been diluted or changed because of power reasons or whatever after the fact. So, but when it comes to that, the gods, I treat them a lot more like a race than I do like omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient beings. They're extremely powerful, extremely difficult to kill, nigh immortal. Um, what I've done with at least this campaign, and Jared and Ed are playing in this campaign, but they won't spoil, and it really isn't a big spoil. Um, Gods are created, are chosen. They're a race of chosen beings created, chosen by creation itself. So the gods became gods before, found this world. Virexia is the world that I have, which is a planet slash plane on a plane of existence. It's a planet on a plane of existence. They found it. They kind of they were caretakers um, for creation. So they're cultivating creation basically is their job. And but they weren't always gods. They were picked to do that job, which opens up a whole lot of opportunity where creation can pick others and new gods can emerge and or mages could try to find a way to bypass creation's being picked by creation and try to become gods on their own. Like there's a lot of opportunities that open up. So it's very not well known that the gods are chosen by creation for specific things and that it's a process. They're a lot of people are just told, oh, they're omniscient, they're omnipresent, they created everything. Um, Very few actually know that it's not that way. So that's how I've kind of set up my pantheon. I've done it with a mix of gods that I've created on my own, as well as some gods that are familiar to people who play D&D. Like, for example, I have Bahamut and Tiamat, are very, very well known deities in other pantheons. So I've kind of mixed and matched, and when I something didn't quite fit, or I really wanted I liked this idea for something, I put that in. So that's kind of how I do it. It's really exciting. This will be the first real deep dive for my campaign with a specific pantheon. I've a lot of the others I've done. I've used just pre-made deities that are well known. So this is my first kind of foray into creating them and using this unique system of them being chosen by creation, made, not born, almost, kind of idea. But like I said, I think it'll give it a lot of opportunity to explore not only mortals' relationships with their deities and how that may change based on the power scaling that they get as they level up and do more things and help more, but also allows for interactions between the deities, between deities, deity to deity, as well as um, like that mortal to deity connection and how that kind of plays in and out and how much does the deity actually say, how does that affect the relationship if they're holding information back, all kinds of stuff I think I can get into. So very
Yeah,
excited to see how that goes.
yeah, I think that's a really cool idea. Kind of the element of them being chosen. It's not one I've actually come across, and not one I really considered. So that's an interesting way to take it. It's almost like the gods are the clerics of the world in
Yeah.
a certain sense. They are able to
Reminds
be
me of like
clerics.
angels.
But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I kind of took the idea very loosely off of the Silmarillion, J.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion, and the what are they called? Why can't I think of the name? Conway and
the
I
Valar
really
and the
the
Maiar.
Valar, where they're stewards, right, of creation. But I just twisted it a little bit with the
Yeah,
fact that they're not actually on the Middle Earth. They don't have to be, and they don't have to like they don't have to have been from a specific race. So, like for example, one of my deities is Asmodeus, who is the 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 devil king of the nine hells. He was never
hmm
a human. um, Creation chose him at some point, and he is above the other devils to a large degree, much more powerful. Um, Really, in my world, the devils are fighting for second place because there's no way that Asmodeus, because he's been chosen, um, can dethrone him. But
yeah.
so there's opportunity for other races to also have deities or become stewards of creation as well.
It's interesting. Tend to have the data off of there elven gods, or human gods, or there dwarven gods.
No,
You
it's
overarching.
I do a general pantheon, and that's because, and this is again kind of I guess a spoiler for you guys, but it really isn't. Um, the gods only tend creation; they don't like create things. Something else is in process to create things. So they don't create humans. They don't create like that is done outside, and they are there specifically to cultivate that which is being created. So um, so it's almost like the deities are also getting prophetic dreams or whatever to go to different places that are in need of tending. So like the gods of my world came because something told them that they needed to come here and start politicking basically to make sure that everything started flourishing. Um, and sometimes the stewards get corrupted, just like others. Sometimes they had nasty motives from the beginning and were able to hide it really well. Um, and and this is a big question mark. Maybe creation creates those things specifically because that discord is needed, and so they think they're lying to creation, and they're like, "Haha, I've one up to you, creation. You thought I was a good person, and now I'm not." But maybe the entire time creation's like, "I knew you were bad. I knew you were going to do this, but like
Controlled opposition.
but I decided to do this anyway because it needs it. You know, the
Yeah,
forest needs the wildfire sometimes. So
very cool.
that's kind of how I'm playing it. I'm really excited
Very
about
cool.
it. We'll see how it works, but
I'm excited to interact with that as
setting
well.
will be in, the gods will be removed, but there'll be
Hmm.
touch points on which they that has happened in my world that are very important, and you'll know about those pretty much immediately. So there's um, what is it? Golden tree. There's a golden tree that was planted right where the gods land, or where the gods landed initially. And then there's also a city that was built. It's almost exactly in the center of the map, and it's on an island. And that's where a big treaty was signed between the gods of discord and the gods of harmony.
Nice.
So
Interesting.
there's a couple of cool touch points where maybe there'll be some residual stuff, right? But largely they've sealed themselves off to protect creation, a lot like Matt Mercer kind of did, where it was like very hands on in the beginning, and then bad things happened, different bad things than what happened in Matt Mercer's, obviously, but and they kind of walled themselves off, but in doing so, also were able to wall off those that were trying to really completely ruin the entire world.
Yeah, very cool. We'll kind of get into it. Back to that.
Mm.
Moved. I guess here too. Like I recall when I played Gotten Realm,
Mhm. Like
talking
the OG
talking
ones,
about
yeah.
a little while.
Yeah.
I remember praying to hear getting getting rescued. Like you said,
I do remember that,
but
yeah. When
it
that 30 died,
you
we just had a D30 laying around. We were like, we'll use it. I remember that
got
one.
two that third.
Oh yeah, it was two, wasn't it? Man, two nat 30s was
But
actually
it's
pretty
better to be
crazy.
lucky than good.
That's right. It's always better to be
Fair. So
lucky.
do you Jared tend to just kind of how do you integrate gods into your campaigns? Creating your own, or do you just use Forgotten Realms or pre-existing stuff? What's your process for creating? How's it
He only includes Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. That is the only God that he includes.
Everyone has to pray to Jesus, or they don't get to play the game. Um, no, I usually just use the so like I don't know if I've been lucky or unlucky in this way because there's no real like it's all a flavor profile, right? You're not really like I wouldn't say it's like a discernible difference in the gameplay at least. But like I don't know if I've been unlucky or lucky to not do it, but for some reason, whenever I run games, no one ever picks a religious like background slash character of any real like. deciding thing. Like Ed, you were the only person, and that was because of like you weren't like you were a paladin, but you weren't playing like a real paladin. So like it would yeah, like it just didn't. It just happened
I
that
was
it was just going for it,
yeah, I was I went for it on death row with kind of how.
Yeah, you had a legitimate like conversion, like a true calling a conversion. But no, I mean I don't really have like a lot of experience like using them. I know a lot of people love to use them here and there, and like it makes sense. And like I have them. Like I usually just keep that Forgotten Realms set list because of the background of it all. Like they're all linked together, and that saves me a lot of time. Like you know why Tyr is blind, you know why Helm's missing his arm or whatever it is. Like there's like reasoning for it. There's already lore that I don't need to really dig into. But yeah, I like them thematically, but I really haven't had to use them like yeah, I really just haven't had to use them. Like everybody that's been a cleric has been like a non-life cleric. Everyone's like doing like the most random cleric ones. So like there was no like praying to life. There was no one who was really into like any of the religion things. Like even like the paladins are like nature paladins or like like conquerors. They're not like religious at all. So like I really like I use
So
them as like story
The
points,
one
but I
thing
haven't really done anything like
I have a
that.
and
question though.
the one thing that you did seem to use um, highly structural sort of social religious structures in terms of like churches and
Hmm.
like you
That's what
it's
I was about to
almost it's very politically geared religion, and it's not like there's very few elements of sort of I guess like the mysticism
Yeah,
of religion
yeah.
when it comes to
I
it's
like my D&D like 1400s Italy. Just corrupt pope, like has an army for some random reason because nobody
yeah.
stopped him. They're taking over
You're
castles
like
and taxing the French.
you're like visions of God. Nah, get that out of here.
We want papal authority, papal
I like
authority.
it reminds me a lot of the Church of Orzhov in the Ravnica setting for Magic the Gathering and also D&D. They're the sort of corrupt church that's sort of their primary sort of ability in Magic the Gathering, like their card sets ability was extort. Is where you basically get nickel and dime the opponents out of their life total slowly.
Oh my
Um,
god. I think my
but
favorite
yeah, I
one that I
remember the
haven't gotten to run yet was I really wanted to run a zealot, like a zealot movement as like a major religious structure, and I haven't gotten to do it yet. But I really want to do that because that's like that'd just be super cool. I would love like a religious zealot, like a Game of Thrones kind of Sparrow zealot, but like way more violent,
I
like
was
just straight crusade.
so I'm running in my family campaign right now. Speaking of that, I'm running a Asmar zealot barbarian who fights with a um a uh, uh scythe. And but he wasn't always he's a zealot, path the zealot barbarian. He wasn't always an Asmar. So in this religion, if you are selected, you become an Asmar, and you are given as a symbol of your status your scythe. And so, but his whole thing, like they and the guy, the DM that's doing it, he created this super dope backstory of like the they this whole church system lives on these flying citadels and just land to like resupply, and they'll like but they dedicate everything to like martial combat and their god, and they fly in these huge citadels, and like these dudes are so badass that like dragons like will actively avoid the citadels, like they'll fly around it. But I'm playing basically, it's not a movement based one. It's like more of a hack and slash. Like I'm gonna go toe to toe with you and just bash you in. But I'm constantly, his name's Blaze Stollard, and he's like, I'm literally just trying to find the person who can best me and like give me a martyr's death, because that's like the highest uh that's the highest level.
A martyr. Wait, like, what is it, like some sick Valhalla where like you have to die as a martyr and you get this really cool,
It's
like,
uh, it's jihadism.
Kind of, I guess.
it feels like that
Yeah,
almost.
No, but they have to die in honorable combat. So
Oh, it has to be
there's that. Like,
honorable. It can't just be like a
yeah,
martyr. Damn.
I can't just like go and like, yeah.
Wait, so what if you get like
like
what if you do what if you just like get executed then? You just screwed? What if you accidentally die?
If I could execute it depends. I'd probably, I don't know.
Demand a trial
you
by
know,
combat. You have to.
It's not very well fleshed out like
Is a
thing.
trial
I like hitting people.
is trial by combat
that was
honorable?
actually that was actually a
Yeah,
huge
trial by
plot point
combat's honorable.
in the
Trial by honor.
backstory of one of my players. It was a big thing that his whole shtick is he kind of ended up getting half. I'll get into this when I talk about my pantheons, but he got halfway corrupted by um, the goddess of vengeance, and he was from a very Viking style culture of these basically the northern sort of barbarian clans, and he was an exile from his clan because his clan did believe in sort of the honorable death and the battle in combat, and then if you were died without were killed without your weapon in hand, it was a dishonorable death and you were kind of barred from entrance into Valhalla. And the big thing is that his character sort of driven kind of into this you know vengeance state, um, killed a number of enemies who had been defeated and were bound. And that was sort of the whole driving motivation for his backstory, is that he needed to kind of be purged of this, you know, dishonor that he brought upon his family, by sort of atoning for the the dishonor he brought to this. And it wasn't even his own clan; it was an enemy clan. But that all the clans, even with their own enmities, have sort of this uniting honor structure tied to their conception of the afterlife that he sort of betrayed. Um, so that you can do some interesting things with that, or
Yeah.
that attitude. But I guess I can talk a little bit about my pantheons now, because I really only have two D&D worlds that I've made. We've kind of talked about
Yeah, we know
before, and
you're
the first
lazy
time
and
I
you
ran
refuse
it,
to make any other worlds. We know.
well, the first time I did it, I did a this this is maybe is one of the times where you could accuse me of laziness as a DM, Jared, actually, because I sort of ran with basically a kitchen sink method of deities, where I was like, really anybody that any player brings me, that they're interested in and having their backstory, I'll integrate into sort of this pantheon. So I mean, had this weird combination of like like Hades being the nephew of Thor, who was cousins with some of the Forgotten Realm deities. Now I did sort of put in some. What I did do is I sort of made them my own thing, and each of them is not, it's not the Zeus of either God of War or Marvel. It was my own sort of take on a really pissed off lightning god. But I that was kind of the way I did it, is because with that one, my kind of goal with that setting is for it to be sort of all encompassing, that if you want to play anything, you can. So it's like, oh, if you want to be a Tempest Domain cleric of Zeus, I'll figure out a way to make Zeus a god from across the ocean who has just now arrived for a short time and picked you as their cleric or whatever. That was kind of more about player autonomy. Um, and it worked pretty well, I think. And the only one I really made up, quote unquote, that I had a particular great old one that was basically based off of Mortimer David, Alan's character that he played in our long-term campaigns. But the more recent campaign that I've run, the one that's been going since for about a year and a half now, that one I created a different world. And I created my own entire pantheon. I was actually going to send this to you guys because I created everything here myself, and I'm gonna just I'll just post it in the chat if you guys are interested. But basically, the way the gods look, they're on this thing called the divine sigil, is the name of it, and it roughly follows the alignment chart. It's like a circle with a line straight through the middle, kind of horizontally through the middle of it, and you have the deities going all the way around the circle, and then on the line across the middle, and essentially the top arc of the circle are the good aligned gods. The line across the middle are the neutral gods, and the ones across the bottom are the evil aligned gods. And it goes progressively from law to chaos as you move from left to right. And it also has this effect of kind of showing the gods that you're most likely to kind of be tempted away from your alignment by, draw a line straight down, from, because the neutral, the lawful, the lawful good is most likely to be seduced away by the lawful evil, the person who they're most likely to slip into. And what I kind of did in my first campaign is that the gods were basically superhumans. Like they were limited. They were actually physical beings in time. They were just sort of uber people, and they in fact came to be. Many of them were people that had sort of been elevated to godhood, because in that setting, their power was based on their worshippers. The quantity and the sort of devotion of their people actually elevated the gods. This one's very different. This one is uh, the gods are incredibly removed. Basically, omniscient. Um, but they're very indirect in the way they interact. Now they do speak directly to people with some regularity, and obviously the players are getting spoken to more than most people would, um, because they're the players and they're the characters. But um, the gods basically are restricted entirely to acting on the world through mortals. Whereas in my previous campaign, the idea is like they choose mortals because the gods are busy dealing with like cosmic level threats. Like Thor can't deal with these cultists because he's fighting the, Cthulhu, who's coming through this, portal or some shit like that.
So basically,
That's
they're the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man of your world. The
that
first
was
one, the
that was
characters.
in that was the first campaign. Yeah,
Okay,
they were kind of the neighborhood level heroes. Even when you got to a point where it's like you're stopping a demon invasion, it's like still the gods are handling bigger problems,
gotcha.
or
Okay,
have bigger evil things that they're trying to do if you're an evil character. Whereas this world, you are the only way your deity interacts with the world, and then the way I have it is each deity has at any given time they might have. Now they don't always have one active, quote unquote, but they have someone who serves as their avatar, who is sort of their word, kind of working through that. And that can be taken away, that can be, but and then each of these is sort of focused into they carry a weapon of some kind that sort of serves as the symbol. It's kind of like Thor's hammer, where it's like it's sort of the source of his power, but like you watch Thor Ragnarok and you realize it's not really the source, it's more the way it's channeled through and sort of as a symbol of what he is, but it's not entirely necessary. That's kind of what the weapons serve as world. And we have, in fact, um, one of our characters was an avatar of the goddess of vengeance, who is an evil goddess, and then now serves is now the avatar for the goddess of justice, who is good. Um, and so, but basically the gods, yeah, I haven't. It I'm leaving a lot of the lore for this world sort of intentionally obscured with the intention of kind of giving a sense of mystery to my players. And to a certain extent, I try not to over prepare things that I try to leave curious, because if I prepare them, I'll end up talking about it just invariably. Like somebody rolls a history check on some element and it'll come up. So with certain things, like with this world, it's like the gods. It's unclear if they're created or if they're you know sort of bound up with the world. There's some suggestion that they're not tied perfectly to the world, that they're tied to people in some way, but they're certainly not elevated people. But I haven't answered the question concretely for myself just because I don't really want the question answered for the players. So I haven't put effort into that. But and that's kind of my process with creating deities kind of has to do with what I want the player experience to be in some essence. So like I created an entire unique Pantheon set for this one because I wanted my characters and players in sort of dark fantasy horror setting to feel out of place, like they don't really know what's going on. Which if they had even gods from the Forgotten Realm, I've heard about some of that element is right. Like, oh, it's kind of it's mysterious, this cult of Bane. But it's like, if you've know anything about the Forgotten Realms, you know, Bane, god of tyranny, you know sort of what he's about. But it's like, if I say, oh, the god, I don't know, Eldir, it's like you don't know anything about him
He could
because
be
I
a good
invented
god for
him.
all we know.
Yeah, exactly. Or an evil god, and
Yeah.
that's kind of part of it is that the entire pantheon was only made known to the players like 4 sessions ago, even though I've had it created for, months and months, and they knew pieces of it. They knew some of the gods, but only just recently have they discovered, and actually there's a god missing from the pantheon that they got, which is a plot point in the final arc of the campaign, is that there's a lost god or a missing god that because there's on the top arc of the seven, on the middle part there's seven, on the bottom part there's a. So a lot of people are always like, who's the last god that's not here? Don't know. And basically, one of the big bads that they're shortly claiming to be emissary of this lost god. That's
Do you find? Because I've never done this, so this is up to you. Um, do you find that when you do that, or that since you've done that, the characters connect better to it, or it doesn't really make a difference in you creating your own,
I think it helps.
going in blind and being like, oh, this is the apple god, hit the cult of apple gods. They spread apple trees. The Johnny Seed god. Like, do you think they connect to it better, or do you think it's kind of it's all the same as long as you're delivering it correctly?
I think it does help with yeah, I think it
Atmosphere.
does
I
help
think it's
with
atmosphere.
it helps with the atmosphere because like the first campaign, right? My goal was not to be, grim dark fantasy usually, and it was more to be kind of epic fantasy style, which is why I'm okay with people like, oh, I mentioned Thor, and like, or I mention, Hades, or I mention, whatever god, and part of the reason I think of using pre-built pantheons is, like you said, it kind of saves you some of the effort of creating associations with these gods. The players just kind of know, like, oh,
It gets,
Thor's kind of he's good, but he's also, can be a little bit, he's chaotic good. Like,
it
Thor's
can,
chaotic good.
it can also help new players find their bearings. So
Mhm.
I'm a big proponent of if you're playing with a young group of players, haven't played a lot of D&D, give them a pantheon of gods that they kind of know about from like Greek mythology or Norse mythology, and you can mix and match those, but keep it to those ones because they'll be able to be like, oh, I know that god. I know what that god's about. It helps them kind of figure out where they are in the world and what's going on and how to interact with the world that you've created. That'd be a big piece of advice to me.
And
Versus just throwing somebody new in and being like, these random names you don't even know. Good luck. You don't know which ones are good or bad or whatever. You're just kind of going.
something else I've done too with like, because I've noticed this, because like one of the things in my world is that dragons are, I love using dragons, but they're only in this world that I've created, the second one, only in a particular part, right? So, and all of my players, we went through a map, we decided, where they live, where they were raised, where they've traveled, right? So some of them, just based on their location, have never seen a dragon, and might not even have heard of them in any, sort of, like in the sense of like a bestiary, right? Like they'll hear stories about like the fire breathing worms or whatever up in the north, but like they don't have like this color kind of goes to this goes to this. And one of the players that I had, who's, like, he was playing a monster hunter, who'd spent his entire time in a different part of the world than dragons were, and they encountered a white dragon, and he's like, "So, what do I know about this?" And he, rolled a decent history check, and I'm like, "You don't really know anything because it's just not something that has ever come up. Like, about fire-breathing dragons. Everyone has heard these stories, but like but the thing is, obviously, the player is not able to separate out that white dragon is ice, you know, in their own player knowledge, which does affect on a meta level their character. The same is true of the Pantheon. So with the and I've done this too, reskinning classic monsters. I've reskinned mind flayers to like giant bug creatures
Hmm.
before, where it's just like the players don't like, if you're going for a sense of being sort of lost and sort of a creepy vibe. I think kind of defamiliarizing your players with the subject matter. Um, I think doing that with the Pantheon, but also with the monsters, is a really good tactic to answer your question, Jared. I think it does
Yeah.
help add to the atmosphere of the game. That's what you're going for. And if you're going for a different atmosphere, and you want to use a pre-written one, or you don't care, and like that's fine. It's like it's game dependent, able to.
Yeah, that my only question was, did you feel like it was different? But I mean, like, because if you deliver it the same way, I was just curious if it actually made like a real impact.
It was certainly different, I think, because like, um with the first one where it's like, oh, Thor is here, or Tyr is here, or Helm is here.
The
A lot
only
of my
reason,
explanation of how the
sorry,
god,
go ahead, go
well,
ahead.
just how they appear, a lot of my explanation is kind of like, this is how they're different from what you're used to in my world. Whereas with my own Pantheon, it's this is how they are, and it's the ability to kind of form the first opinion of this entity, which I know they haven't heard of before because they're original.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel my only concern with doing that and not using like a stock, I don't want to say stock list, but like a stock list. My only concern is that like if you don't like hammer home the deities pretty decent, they're gonna like, you know, like if you do like the first arc, like from levels 1 to 3 or something like that, whatever you're doing, you do like a kind of pretty heavy religious, like you're helping the local cleric or whatever, or like your cleric is helping the other priests or cleric or whatever, and then like two more arcs flow by and the gods kind of get phased out because you move into like a rescue mission or like a like a something else like a dungeon dive or like a treasure hunt or something like that instead. I feel like that'd be pretty difficult to try to like keep that momentum moving towards it. But that's just a concern that I have. I'm not saying it be that way in
And that might
practice.
be true. That might be true, but just by nature of the campaign that we created, like, and the characters that the players gave me, right? We have a cleric who is a servant of a particular god. We have a blood hunter whose order of blood hunters is devoted to a particular god. We have
Yeah,
a
see, like that. If
you
you
know,
have that, I feel like it's
we have a
okay. Cause
warlock who serves, and yeah, who serves an archfey who's not, and then that's another thing which I guess we can kind of pivot into here, and
Right?
just talking about
Well, real fast,
gods.
kind of
Oh
talk
yeah,
to
go
you
ahead, Ethan.
real fast to kind of answer your question, Jared, too. What I do sometimes, um, and I kind of just sometimes see what sticks is it first off, usually in my unlike you, Jared, in most of my campaigns, at least somebody has picked something that has to do with a deity of some kind. Um, but sometimes if they don't, or if I'm trying to insert something, or I'm trying to like insert something because of an arc that's or how the arc is going or what I want to do. For me, gods are also beings that are trying to manipulate the world around them. So guess what? Your guy who has no experience with any deity may start getting talked to in his head by something or have dreams or whatever, and that kind of inserts it, and the player still gets to decide what to do. I'm giving them a choice, right? Because they could choose to be like, nah, but guess what, 9 times out of 10 you're going to pull that thread because you're like, something's talking to me in my head, what is it? Right? So if I want to kind of insert it, it can be the deity reaching out to a particular person. Hey, you have a particular set of skills, especially in a setting with like eds, where it's like I work through people, right? You have a particular set of skills and you're in a particular area of the world. I need you to do this for me, and I'll give you X, Y, and Z for it. Right? It's just like another barter or bargain. It's just with a god. Or you can have the god be like not used to rejection and being like, you mortal have to go do this because you're here and have the skill sets. And then that's a cool experience for the player to be like, what do I do? Do I just say, yeah, sure? Do I say no? What's in it for me? Like they get to play their character into it more as well. Um, so that's something that I've used as well. If I'm like, I want to keep this as a thread, maybe it's not super important right now, but later on it's going to be for like the big threat. I want to keep that like connection with Pantheon, and sometimes it'll be the god that reaches out to the player, not the other way around.
Yeah, that's not. I like that actually. It's actually I might need to put that in my back pocket.
I've definitely done that too a little. I've had some interactions too with like the gods and other sort of high being close to their level or on their. That was something I wanted to talk about too with you. You know what you consider. Um, I guess we've all talked about a little what power level they have if they're omniscient, you know, like if they're able to kind of know everything, know the player's thoughts, if they're tricked, you know, or if uh, they're what counts as a god, you know, archfey or sort of a crafty counts as a quote unquote god or
Cosmic
that
being,
sort of thing.
just because Cthulhu is like a
I
cosmic
can,
being, right?
yeah. So I can touch on this a little bit. Um, and this is like far previous history, so I'm not worried about it messing anything with you guys. Your campaign. So the gods are stewards. They're chosen. They're above everything. Like when we're talking CR rating, I think the highest monster in the CR rating is CR 30, which is the Tarask. Um, for the so they'd be like CR 35. Like they're very difficult. Like they would be a way deadly level threat for a level 20 maxed out party, and they probably would need help from other things even to like fight it, right? But they're not impossible to defeat. They're not impossible to kill. Things that are directly like right below them would be things like the Tarask, like ancient dragons, especially ancient dragons that have collected powers from something or another to get more powerful. Archfey are just below them and deal with them like at a level that's different from like mortal to god. That level is different with between the Archfey and the gods because they're much closer. I've done something fun with Great Old Ones. The Great Old Ones, this kind of touches onto what's going on with being stewards. Stewards of creation have been around since creation itself began. The only way for stewards to pass on is to decide that their time has come to a close and they basically choose to die. Some
So,
of them don't.
so there's
What?
no way to be like unpicked. Yeah, once you're picked, you're picked.
Um, there may be a way, but nobody's ever been unpicked before, um, as far as people know.
Gotcha.
But you can also choose to end your time, right? So you can choose to, and also my argument would probably be after a certain amount of time, if you're unpicked, you age however long you've been alive for. So it would be an instant kill anyway. um, so they can choose to pass on and either give the mantle over to somebody who they think is good, or just be like, creation will pick somebody else to fill my space. Some don't. Those are the great old ones, and they eventually go crazy because no thing that's been immortal, because they're chosen, they're not originally immortal beings. They have a start, they just don't technically have an end unless they choose to. But some live so long that they crack. Basically, they go crazy, and but the reason that they don't look anything like what creation is now is because they were born so long ago that these civilizations that they had originally been born into and then chosen from have long since perished, and they just roam around basically just as insane, highly powerful beings, like insane gods.
I freaking love it.
And
That's
that's because
awesome.
they refuse to choose to die, and now at this point they've snapped so much that they can't really make that choice. And for some reason, you don't know why, nobody knows why, creation
Keeps them
thinks that these are
around.
good things. Like they need to be, they if somebody kills them, that's one thing, but they're not. Creation's not trying
Unpicking
to pick
them.
them, and it may be
Yeah,
because you can't get unpicked, right? Who knows? But
that's a
that's
super
the
cool
idea.
idea. I think that's awesome. I think that's a really cool way of looking at great old ones. I don't know if you caught that, Jared, when you were walking around, but essentially
Yeah.
the great old ones in Ethan's camp. Yeah, you did. Okay.
Yeah, I've been
They
listening.
it's that's a really cool way of looking at great old ones.
So
Yeah.
they would be
I mean
considered on the level of
that's
gods
cool.
as well.
Yeah, my world we have the so in my first campaign, kind of everything was on par as being like, gods or whatever. Um, including Fae, including great old ones. They were all kind of equal level things or the same sort of things, just kind of from different places. The My current one, the gods. Now, while the precise mechanics haven't been kind of made explicit, they're in some way bound up to people. They themselves are not humans, but they're bound in some way to people, and they kind of are coming out of like the fact that humans have a notion of justice in some way maybe creates the goddess of justice, but it doesn't create her and it doesn't sustain her because she remains as she is and remains as powerful even without people worshiping her. But there's some way that she's bound up to mortals in that way. It's not clear exactly what. Fae are different. The only way you could eliminate a Fae is if you were to totally erase the material plane, is the Archfey are intrinsically bound to the physical world, which is slightly different than how like Forgotten Realms does it. Because Forgotten Realms, like there's a separate kind of higher, I guess, with the Feywild. The Fey are so necessarily bound to the material world. You couldn't really ultimately get rid of them unless you somehow totally eliminate the entire plane. Um, and the Fae, what I do in my world, the gods are kind of the way actually because one of the characters has a patron who's a Fae. And one of the way he described it is that gods are sort of masters of masters of the vertical, whereas Fae are masters of the horizontal. Like gods have an immense amount of power in a narrow, specific thing, whereas Fae are broadly very, very strong, and they have domains that expand wider than gods. Now they may not be basically the way that the this particular archfey is called the peddler. The way he put it was that I would lose to any god within their domain, and I would defeat any god outside of their domain. Is kind of the way they're very jack of all tradesy, um, and they sort of are by that nature like um, they're not really worshipped as much as they're sort of I don't know lived dealt with. I guess is maybe a way to, like you. They're more the ones you're making deals with. They're not reaching out to you in the same way usually. So sometimes. And then great old ones, they haven't really encountered them. The great old ones, kind of the idea with them is that they are sort of made up of the stuff that pre-existed, kind of the material. The players have only really encountered, and it was kind of a one-off sort of fun thing that they did, where they sort of basically they were traveling through a particular I don't doesn't matter. Anyway, they found their way to basically this cavern where the great old one dwelled, and he essentially challenged them to a middle battle. And that's really the only kind of encounter they've had with the old one, kind of this creature that's sort of residing in the earth, um, sort of I don't know, just contemplating and sleeping, just sort of chilling, and
Just hanging
haven't
out.
really
Yeah.
had much reason to write them in. Yeah, haven't had much reason to write them into this setting yet because it's not really a setting generally. Like even though it's a horror campaign, there's not really much Lovecraftian horror. There hasn't really been a reason to investigate them too deeply, the great old ones. But I mean, I'm sure I could do something with it, but it just hasn't been the focus. So I kind of threw him in because I thought, hey, it'd be fun for them to have a riddle battle with a Cthulhu type creature. And then we haven't really revisited the great old ones. So if
Lovecraftian
they
horror
come
is
up,
one of those things you got
we
to really
might later.
focus on. Yeah. The thing about the Lovecraftian that kind of sucks is like when you include it with other things, it just like gets either the forefront or the back. So like it kind of sucks.
You have to make it the entire focus of what you're doing
Yeah.
cosmic horror because everything like if you look at the Magic the Gathering lore, like the Eldrazi are sort of their crafty and like the Lovecraft equivalents for Magic the Gathering. And it's like whenever the Eldrazi show up, the entire plot becomes about the Eldrazi and like
Yeah.
dealing with them and booting them off of where they are because you can't do cosmic horror small. Like that's
No, it's all got
like
to
the
be
kind of
huge scale.
by necessity. Yeah, you can't have it be anything other than sort of these widespread tendrils spreading throughout that you have to fight off, kind of barely scraping by with your sanity. Um, and it does if you do it. I've seen some really great Lovecraftian. I mean, the one I think of with sort of the cosmic horror element is um, Dark Dice podcast. They do a D&D game which is very much has elements of cosmic horror and really sort of puts the emphasis on it and does it very well. But that's all. Like, it's not. I'm not gonna say like, oh, that's all it is. It's a really good podcast, very interesting. But like, they're not sort of exploring different veins of horror. It's you're full sending sort of element of horror.
Yeah, that's the thing about it too. Is like when you get to that scale, it like you said, it's inherently large scale. There's no like little Cthulhu running around, which sucks because you got to make it like a massive either extinction or
Could be.
invasion or something. What'd you say?
And that's something I did once. I had a sort of
Yeah.
I had a sort of eldritch horror sort of campaign down here at one point. And it wasn't like eldritch horror. It was kind of like the precursor to what would be a world of eldritch horrors, because like the players were playing in the world that you guys have played in before, and there was a meteor that crashed with a baby in it. It was like it wasn't a human baby. It was like a kind of blue skinned, sort of, it looked a little bit like baby Cthulhu actually, but it was a baby, like actually like tiny, infant size. And um, the party sort of discovered this, baby, and um, it started growing at a super rapid rate. Like it was like infant sized, and then 3 days later, it was like the size of an 8-year old, and it kind of started getting bigger and bigger, and that was sort of the, I guess, plot of the camp. And the thing is, it only grew when it consumed things. The more it consumed, the more it grew, and the players, the whole point of that campaign was basically like, what the hell do we do with this thing that we've discovered? That clearly, if it keeps doing, keeps consuming things, it's going to become unstoppable. And there were several kind of governments, I guess, that wanted to use it as a weapon. And part of the thing was the players having to escape with this mini eldritch horror. But even then, like, even though it's a baby eldritch horror, that takes the full force of the plot, not a side plot.
No, it can't be. It's like almost inherent, I think. And I don't like to use that word, but I think it's almost inherent.
I think to work as a workaround, because I'm a solutions guy, right? That's what I like to
Mhm.
do. You'd have to insert the other parts into an Eldritch horror campaign. So you'd have to put, if you wanted things like a classical D&D setting, or like dragons and dungeons literally in your campaign, but you're doing Eldritch horror, it would have to be like tied to the plot but a side thing. For example, like, we need the dragon's help, even maybe evil dragons. We need a red dragon's help to do this thing, to beat this eldritch horror. You have to go on a campaign, or like a quick side campaign, side thing, to go either fight and subdue the dragon to prove your strength and allow him to negotiate, whatever it is as a DM. But you'd have to do that and then because but it all redirects back to the problem at hand. Same with like an archfey. We need to go to the Fey realm, talk to the Summer Court, get supplies and like things that we need to help defeat the eldritch horror. So there are ways you could probably insert the other D&D ideas and things in, but you're right. If it's an eldritch horror campaign that you want to do, like, even sometimes the gods are like, hey, even if you want to work with the gods, it's a lot of times maybe a side thing. We got to go get this boon or that boon to go do this thing. So I agree, but I also think there are definitely workarounds if, as a DM, you want to have that element of Eldritch horror, but also want to have other things going on in your world that aren't just tied to this. Because most likely the Eldritch horror isn't known, like, it's not a known threat until the very end. So it's like, you know, even halfway through the campaign, your party may be the only, or high levels of government in your party may be the only people who know about it, right? So
It's very true. Though there is also like an element to it, right? Where it's like if your players want to play Eldritch Horror campaign, like they're not gonna, you probably won't need to do write arounds, for like,
no.
here's how we're gonna do the dragon dungeon delve and quest. Like if you're signing up, if your players are interested in an Eldritch Horror campaign, you know, um, you wouldn't like, and obviously you are at liberty to do that. You know, if you maybe want, and this would maybe be the way to do that, is you have a larger campaign and you want to take an arc that's Eldritch
Yeah.
Horror. Maybe that's where you do what you're talking about, Ethan. But
Well,
like
for
if
me, it's
people,
just I would get bored DMing that. I could never do that. I could never do like a 3-year campaign of just Eldritch Horror. Like I
well,
need
for
to put
sure,
something in there to spice it up for me. And also for me, Eldritch Horror, the idea of Eldritch Horror is like you can't beat it alone. Like mortal people can't beat an Eldritch Horror because go crazy or whatever, yada yada. Yes, like it's D&D and you get to level 20 and it's great. But for me, like an Eldritch Horror is like I said, kind of crazy god level, but doesn't like just is insane. For me, it'd be like you could, I guess, fight it by yourself, and I'd obviously have there'd be an opportunity for you to win, especially if you paired and you're level 20 and you're doing all the right stuff and the dice are in your favor. But guess what? It would be a hell of a lot easier if you had like a Fey army helping you. So maybe you should
for
do that
sure,
too, you
for
know,
sure.
or
Well,
whatever.
yeah, for sure. I think we could, what we could do now too, with kind of the digression we've
Yeah.
the Eldritch Horror campaigns, right? Like, what if we're taking it back to Pantheons and the Gods, right? I think we
Mhm.
can sort of do a discussion of the effect of your choices, kind of the way, not just the way you make gods, but the way you use gods in the campaign, how they affect your game, and the world and the player experience, which we touched on a little bit, right? With kind of that what I was talking about with like creating your pantheon gives the pantheon a sense of mystery because the players don't know what it is. Um, Kind of thinking about other ways that the way the gods function affect your players, and kind of the one that I think is really important is like how and why do gods select clerics, servants, right? Like what are the, and I guess the answer to that one is going to be in somewhat, dependent on the player that you have, but just kind of like what do you guys view sort of the generally with gods and their cleric player character? Are they sort of taskmasters? Are they sort of, you know, masters and disciples sort of thing? How do you guys tend? Jared, you said you haven't really had any players, but like you've had NPCs. I know that are clerics, or at least kind of what.
Um,
So,
Good. Let me
you want to
think
go
about
first,
that one.
Jared, or you want me to?
I'm gonna think about that one.
Okay,
Good. You got it. Go.
I'll let you think. So for me, it is extremely dependent on the deity that you are dealing with. So for some, but not all of, but most of my evil, quote unquote, evil pantheon, it is very much you are the subject, I am the master. I give you power so you can have subjects. But at the end of the day, I can take that power away very quickly. So, but then there are good gods who are much more collaborative um, with their followers. Another fun fact is clerics are not the highest level of connection to a deity in my world. So, especially for the good pantheon, the leaders of the churches of the major deities in my world, the leaders of the churches are divine soul sorcerers. There's only one per deity at a time. And the churches, when the soul sorcerer dies, the churches search incredibly far and wide to find where the next child is. And then they are basically trained and brought up in politics and their deity and their connection to the deity to lead the church in the future.
Like how the
That's a
search for
big
the Dalai
thing.
Lamas. Like how Dalai Lama searches go. That
Kind of.
okay.
Yes, kind of.
But in a
And it's a
non-reincarnation
big
way.
deal too because like if your child is Yeah, and if your child is the divine soul sorcerer, your family's taken care of as well. So like, and it could be from a slummy area. Like it's no rhyme or reason really to it. It's more of what the god chooses. So it's like there have been scandals where people have like tried to lie about their kid being a divine soul sorcerer, get in. Um, but that's just one of the ways I've kind of connected it, right? So it's like not only are clerics close to their deities and kind of chosen, but they're these divine soul sorcerers are chosen at birth um, for the specific deities. So um, so that's kind of something as well. So it just for me it depends on the deity. How do you communicate or connect with that? Is it more collaborative? And I it changes over time for me as well. Like your level 3 cleric is not going to be interacting with their deity the same way as a level 18. Um so that's kind of what I do. It's very individual, but again, that's also because the gods in my campaign were once mortal and have their own very specific personalities and are not all like I'm omnipotent, I've never been dead, I've never been born, I'm never going to die kind of deal. It's very much like they're stewarding, they're communicating, they're interacting with creation to try to further their own purposes. So,
That's kind of how my original campaign was. It
mhm,
was sort of a collaborative, like you could roll persuasion check against
mhm,
in my first campaign. My second one, that's not really the case.
yeah,
There, and to me, there's like a like uh, the more a deity can directly affect the world,
mhm,
the more the world can directly affect the deity is
mhm,
kind of how I think about it. So like if you have Thor who can actually like strike his hammer and level a mountain if he so chooses, right? He is also subject to being persuaded
that's
or being influenced by people in this world. Whereas with this other one that I have, they have very limited direct influence. Very limited direct
I
influence.
guess I should
Only
caveat real quick too. My
sure.
pantheon is like yours though. Like but the difference is they did have direct access to the world and then voluntarily chose to give it up.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of in
Oh,
the
for
middle.
sure.
Like the persuasion would be like a high roll, and maybe
Sure.
it would be lower based on, hey, I've been loyally serving your purposes for a very long time. I've stopped all these threats. I think this is the better course of action. Roll persuasion. That persuasion, though still high, is going to be weighed differently than say some guy who hasn't followed him at all. Um,
For sure.
so
For
yeah,
sure. Yeah, and
I
the second one I have, I guess, just was saying as well
yeah,
is
go
like
ahead.
they're very much it's like you're not going to persuade them. Like
yeah.
they are unchangeable forces of nature,
Hmm.
sort of, but they sort of pick based on trust. Yes, it's kind of the way it works. One of the player that I had who originally was uh, the avatar of the goddess of vengeance, right? Basically, the question he asked when he got picked by because he was offered to become the avatar of the goddess of justice, sort of rejecting his sort of former path of vengeance. And he was like, why do you want me to do this? Because he'd kind of seen some of the past avatars just through the campaigns, like these kind of white knight exemplars of paladin esque type. He's like, why the hell would you pick me? And she's like, well, because justice and vengeance are you know very close for one, and also I want somebody who knows what it feels like, both to be unjust and to have injustice done upon them, who can actually appreciate this, is kind of the way she spun it. Um, and it's like they can pick. They don't need to pick the same thing every time. They're not like it's not that they're unchanging. They're unchangeable. I guess is kind of the way I would
Hmm.
like they can't be acted upon by outward things, but they can change their approaches per their machinations or whatever. But they're much more unchanging. They much less able to be perceived
They
than
changed. They changed more so to internal stimuli than external stimuli.
precisely, or like they're reacting, to a change of circumstance, not so much that they're like in the material plane. Like it's not so much like, oh, I'm getting convinced out of what I am. It's like the world has changed,
So I have to
and
change with
so
it.
yeah,
Mm.
that
The
I kind of,
world's the thing that changed, so I need to adjust
hmm
accordingly.
I, th-
exactly.
I think that I run basically like I like the idea of like how the Greeks wrote their gods. They're like just running around the world causing mischief sometimes, but like you can also barter with him and like make deals with him and trick him. Be like, oh, like I can't think of the what's the guy's name. He plays the uh, Hephaestus builds the golden net and catches Ares and Aphrodite.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking of. Like it's like that, like that's funny to me. Like the gods are even going around getting each other in like trickery and stuff like that, and they kind of just are like, but they're also like inherent of their own nature. Like if you pray to slaughter someone to Ares, for example, he'd be way more inclined to accept that. Or like if you're a great warrior, he'll be like, oh yeah, that's my dude. That guy kills people, or that guy does a lot of damage, or like like but he's innately like a combative person. Whereas like if you were to do like the nature god or whatever, it like if you're praying for healthy crops, I guess to Demeter, it's like she's more inclined for that. But you have to like also kind of pick what they would find interesting, I guess. Like you couldn't ask Zeus to like help grow your crops or whatever, right? But if you made a deal with whomever for an exchange or a gift or something like that, or like they go and retrieve something, like the classic like Heraclean labors, like go kill this thing, and like and we're on good terms, or like. But I also like it because I like it more. I feel like because they curse people a lot more, and it also really messed up like I want to say like poetic justice ways, like making Narcissus
Totally.
so beautiful, but he
Yeah.
stares at his own reflection. He can never leave. So that's
I
I kind of
love.
like it that way because it's like almost poetically written
Yeah.
already.
Yeah. And I like to, like, for example, to go on your example, like the cursing of Odysseus and his crew because they forgot to sacrifice to Poseidon, right? And they were sailing home. So they sacrificed to all the other gods. They didn't sacrifice to Poseidon, and now they're going to spend 10 years at sea, right? Getting hammered and shipwrecked, and everybody dying except Odysseus, and then he finally gets home after a huge amount of time and all this stuff, right? And it's like, man, that one little thing, and Poseidon curses you, but if you're in his domain, which is the sea, and you're gonna have a tough time of it, right?
Right.
That's
That was
something
the
I love. This right here, you guys can see it. This is one of my maybe
uh,
my
uh,
favorite book.
he's
Theros.
holding up the Mythic Odysseys of Theros D&D book.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of my favorite sources, source books for D&D because it's based off of the Greek myth inspired um, setting in Magic the Gathering, and the gods are kind of precisely how you described, Jared. They're very much present, and they're
Yeah.
really, really fucking petty. Like they
Yeah. Yeah. They
are
hold grudges
so
forever because they're
yes, and this book not only kind of details in a very in-depth way the way the gods think, each of them, and the way their acolytes behave. Because the shtick of this setting is that everybody is in some way picked by a god, right? Because if you read the Greek myths about the demigods, like everybody is connected to one of them in some way. It might be parent, it might be their kind of the favored one. Everybody is picked by somebody, usually Zeus, but often Athena. But this book gives exactly like what classes or what backgrounds or what domains each of these gods really likes, and then it so introduces this really cool system called the piety system. The idea with the piety system is, I'll just read one of these out here. Just the god of deception. Basically, you have set ways of gaining what's called piety. You start with 0. If you're a level 1 character, you start with no piety. Gain or lose piety to the god that you're kind of in service of. Only be in service of one god at a time. And so, like, I'll just use here. Phaenax is the god of deception. And so, like, if you do one of these things in a session, you gain a piety point at the end of the session. So, helping a fugitive escape justice, pulling off a daring robbery, obstructing champions of the other gods, building or restoring a temple to Phaenax, right? And this is something that sort of takes time in game. But then you also lose piety, Phaenax, if you, these are the ways you do it, forthrightly assisting lawgivers in their duties, uh, swearing. No, this is the funny one. Swearing and then honoring an oath,
Wow.
then bringing bringing order in times of chaos, and then there's actually mechanical benefits you gain based on your piety score, and each of the gods have that. So this is one of my favorite settings for playing
Jared's
that
like,
type of
I have a new
campaign.
character idea.
Just mischief, just straight douchebaggery.
You know, we actually had a
The
character, and
god
Just
of
so
it was
just
douchebaggery.
the
it,
god of slight inconveniences.
when I played this setting down here, it was the funniest thing because basically every god has you get a piety increase if you in some way spend time in the session creating or restoring a broken down temple or shrine of a god. And we had a servant of Phaenax, out of deception, and a servant of the goddess of the harvest. And I had explained to the party that it was going to be kind of more of a nautical campaign, kind of like in the style of the Odyssey or Jason and the Argonauts. And one of the players decided to pick a servant of the goddess of the harvest. It was kind of hard to find opportunities for her to gain piety just based on the setting, because most of it was like defending farmland from attack or whatever, like that kind of thing, which is hard to set up for if you're on a boat. And one of the things I did is they were on some island. I'm like, okay, I'll give a chance for the servant of the harvest goddess to gain some piety. So I put like a broken down shrine that she spent time building up during downtime, and they were getting ready to leave, and the guy who serves the god of deception is just like, can I stealthily, after they've left, approach the shrine that she just restored? He basically defaces the shrine that
Nice.
the servant of the god of the harvest had been restoring right before they leave. So he ends up getting the piety instead of the one.
Oh my
But
gosh.
that's the
That's
kind of thing you do in
amazing.
the campaign. It was a
Well,
lot
that
of
that's
fun.
a good.
A lot of fun.
That's kind of a good segue into something else we kind of had to talk about, touch base on, which is like in Greek mythology, do you have hierarchies of gods? Um, are there young and old gods? Are there gods that are less powerful than other gods? Um, I don't know, Jared, if you have an idea of this because, and I'm kind of asking you first because you kind of said you like the idea of the Greek gods. Do you have a lot of like quote unquote demigods or like lower level local gods for only a specific area, or no, or would you use them?
Mm, hold on.
Or I guess same question to you, Ed, if you want to go for it.
Yeah. Demigod thing, now that you bring it up, the only time I've ever used proper demigods, like children of gods or something similar, is
Hmm.
Theros. Um, I don't really have demigods in the proper sense of like they're the child of God. Um, in really any setting, which now I think about is pretty underutilized. Um, but I usually have I don't know, I usually don't have hierarchies as much as I have sort of clusters if I have anything. So like uh, in my first campaign setting, like there was a cluster of gods that are kind of related to each other and on the same level and sort of dealing with the same things,
Hmm.
both on the good and the evil side, and that kind of creates like a tension.
Hmm.
With my other one, uh, I really don't have any sort of hierarchy of power because all of the gods are sort of the same types of being, and they sort of are not quite in the same domain. There's not like, and we'll get to this soon, kind of discussion of domains, but they're not in the same. They don't really cover the same thing. Like they're like justice and vengeance, right? Those two things can kind of butt heads
Hmm.
sometimes, but it's not so much like one's not more powerful than the other per se, and neither the gods are like more powerful than the other per se. In the same way, it's like the god of, you know, I don't know, trying to think here, the kind of gods who have like elements of fire and flame, right, are not less or more powerful than the the goddess of like ice.
Hmm.
Uh, And there's not, in my campaigns, the one I'm running right now, there's not really any element of um, there's no genealogy
Hmm.
of the gods, right? Genealogy. There's no the so and so is the
Hmm.
child of so and so, right? The gods
Yeah.
just are. So there's not really a hierarchy in that. And there's also not really anything that can lessen these gods'
Yeah.
power, um, excepting, that like there's a couple of things, but it doesn't really weaken the god. It just sort of detaches their influence in some way.
Hmm.
Like the god themselves is not affected, just sort of the effects of the god are affected. So I don't really have I haven't toyed with this except when I ran Theros, and it is a lot of fun
Hmm.
when you have that sort of very very present affecting it, I guess. Uh, but yeah. Anyway, Jared, if you want to
Yeah,
chat on this too.
yeah. I like the idea of it, of like a hierarchy, but I don't like it in the sense of like a family, like how like
Jared, if you could
Odin and
start that one more time, we couldn't hear you at the beginning. If you could just start it one more.
oh yeah, I said I don't really. Sorry, it's kind of cutting. Whatever. I said I like the idea of the hierarchies, but like not in the sense of like a family hierarchy, like the father son kind of thing. So like I don't really like it in that sense, but I do like it because I think again, like I hate that I keep using this word because I don't really like it. Like inherently, like some would be stronger. Like the god of the underworld would be stronger than the goddess of the harvest. Like or like the god of the craftsman god is not going to be as powerful as the guy whose whole domain is the ocean. So like in that sense, I like it, but I kind of like, and I also kind of like the idea like in the Trojan War, like Correct me if I'm wrong, classics majors. I'm pretty sure Zeus is like, we are not going to get involved. Not really. Like there's like no real fighting, and then like Ares gets down there and fights. Who's he fight? Like Ajax or Diomedes? Someone I can't remember who he fights. But like Ares fights him, and like
Di- Diomedes is Diomedes is the one who wins.
wounds him. That's what it is. Yeah. But I like that because I kind of like that sense of like the top dog is like what keeps the order in the chaos. Kinda. He's like, hey, I know there's this huge war going on. We're all kind of getting favors out of it, and like we're supporting each side. But if you guys go down there, I will like personally beat you down, and that's what they're kind of afraid of. And I kind of like that. But other than that, like I don't really like do it too often. Like I don't really think about it too often. I've never had that like situation kind of pop up where I've been like, is this God gonna go scrap it out? So I don't know. Yeah, I like them, but I don't use them.
For sure. Sure. And something else too that you kind of brought up, uh, something I wanted to address as well, because like clerics or divine magic is tied to what's called divine domain, right? You have
Hmm.
these different domains, and I'll grab the player's handbook here in a second to kind of read off some of them. But you mentioned, Jared, it's like, okay, the god of this domain, death, or the underworld, is going to kind of be almost necessarily stronger than maybe the god of something like the harvest or something minor like sleep, right? It seems like sleep is just kind of a baby version of death, right? And
Yeah.
I am compelled by that for sure. I think that's true in a certain type of pantheon. The Greek pantheon would be one, and if you create one kind of like that, but like my pantheon, it's actually interesting. If you read through what I sent you guys,
Mhm.
like um, you can't really tell exactly what each of these is the god of when you read through it. You can maybe get some sense of it, but you don't really know exactly what each one's the god of. Because in this particular world that I have, like they're the god, their domains are not quite something physical generally. Like there's no god of water, or like there's not a god of fire, right? There are gods who have fire elements, kind of tied into them, like Scortia the Charred or Eldir the Blaze Eternal. Like they have elements of fire in their imagery, but most of them are gods of things that are not physical. If you tie your deities to something that is more concrete, I think that it's correct to kind of give a hierarchy to it. But if everything is sort of in these uh, domains that are kind of removed in some sense, or that are kind of removed from the physical world in the sense of like they're more about the forms of the things and kind of what the things represent, as opposed to, because like the goddess of cold, quote unquote, or ice and snow in my domain, it's like she's not really the goddess of ice and snow. She's really kind of the goddess of like apathy and sort of this callousness, um which is why she's called the frozen heart, is sort of her moniker, like Hyonia, the frozen heart, right? And she's been associated with cold, but that's not really her domain, right? That's kind of maybe something that could be analogous to what she is, but it's not really what she does. In the same way, the sun goddess, quote unquote, is actually the goddess of justice, but she's been associated with the sun. But if you have a god that's actually the god of the sun, or actually the god of the ocean, or actually, whatever, I think that the idea of a hierarchy makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I'm gonna piggyback off that because my pantheon is very much concepts. So like the gods are are in charge of specific concepts that then are given symbolism by people. Because it's actually a lot of the primordials uh, and beings from the elemental planes are what actually regulate the natural world. water, earth, fire, all that stuff, and they interact with the gods, and they're kind of like the gods and the elemental, the primordials are like they interact and communicate based on like how to best steward, but the gods are very much more like running through some of them. Sanctoris is the patriarch. He's the god of the sun, summer, and holy fire. But it's like he was given those. He was given being god of the sun and summer and holy fire, and it's because he's actually an like he's the leader. He's a king like presence. He is embodies good leadership. And then they've associated, kind of like you said with justice, they've associated the sun, summer, and this idea of like cleansing fire to that, but it's not his thing. Um, Another god is like um, the law crafter is the god of knowledge, law, and civilization, and he has certain things that people associate with him, but what he is knowledge, law, and civilization. That's kind of his thing. And same with like um, and Hadron, the architect, is craftsmanship, music, and the arts. So it's like I give them even probably less because you're giving them even more like forms like apathy and like these specific things, but that's kind of what I do am doing too with the idea of like concepts um that they kind of have under their purview, and then symbols are associated based on that, but it's not really that he's like he's not really the god of summer, because summer is a season and it is actually kind of more dictated by the primordials than it would be gods.
That's exactly, yeah, kind of exactly. Able to look at the the one that's the goddess of the sea, right? Is her moniker is the unconquerable, right? She's Thessalia the unconquerable, and that's kind of her thing. Is she's the and that kind of ties into the way that the gods are sort of actually tied to humans, or not just humans, but mortals and um, their attitude, is that she's tied to that attitude of kind of being brazen and unable to be never say die, and that's associated to the sea, even though it's not kind of direct um, what she is. The other one, uh, oh, I guess the dancer, right? He's Core the dancer. Right? He's sort of he's been associated with kind of dance and mirth and happiness, but he's actually, and that's kind of what he's the god of, is sort of joy, essentially. But he's been associated with things that are associated with joy. So that's kind of the image that he is kind of tied to. So that's kind of what I did with this campaign. Whereas the other one, very very different process
Hmm.
that I did. Sort of whatever was there. But something I wanted to bring up too. This is something else that I thought was done really well in Theros, and I wanted to see if you guys Pantheon allowed for this. Mine doesn't. Um, One of the things that Theros did, they is it basically characterized every single one of the gods, so that you could have a like a lawful good, or a good character representing this god, or an evil character representing God, and not just like thinking they are, but that the god actually is backing this depending on your campaign, right? So if you're running a campaign, because the idea basically with of Theros is that the bad guys are always tied to the gods, no matter which god. So basically, you're able to sort of craft it. Oh, each of your players picks their god,
Mhm.
and then you pick the god, one of the gods that they did not pick is kind of the big bad, and you're able to do that with every single god. Like even the ones where it's like, oh, the sun god, oh, the goddess of the city, civilization that you can contrive of each one as having people that are being under them should you like you can have sort of the lawful stupid, you know, type. I think of Superman in Injustice, where he kind of becomes almost totalitarian in taking away people's choice to do bad things. Right? He becomes that's kind of how I contrive of like characters who worship like the god of the sun or pharaohs, or you could have good characters who are sort of the who worship like the god of death or deception, like a grave domain cleric or like a trickery domain cleric who is trying to be like a Robin Hood type figure who's a good guy even though he's serving the god of deception. And like you can but then you could also contrive them as evil as well, and you're able to kind of do it anyway. And I just wanted to know if your guys' pantheons, when you use them, tend to allow for that, or if they don't. Starting with myself, mine really seem not to. It really seems that when I have evil gods and I have good gods, and I have neutral, and it's like if you can maybe have somebody who's neutral, kind of leaning into the evil and good, but like if you're a good god, like the people that like the way my gods work, they don't give support to people that are not in alignment with them. Like if there was evil people worshiping the goddess, of justice, she's not gonna actually give power. Whereas in Theros, every god will give people who worship them power, whether they're good or not. I just kind of wanted to know what your guys like for that.
I can go first in this one
I
because
usually go.
mine's pretty good, pretty easy.
Yeah, go for it, Jared.
Um, so like I kind of was discussing earlier, I like to take the fickleness of the entity, I guess, like how the Greeks do it, and make it like if he's the god of the sea, he's fickle like the weather. He sometimes he's good, sometimes he's bad, sometimes he doesn't care, But so I kind of combine Theros and that then I guess because I make the gods care as long as they are worshipped by that person, and then but you gotta worship them and you gotta catch them at the right time and like that, or like if like certain people again are going to be inherently good because that's their uh, thing. Like when I use Helm or Tyr, like Tyr's the god of justice, right? He's easy. So obviously, you know, you couldn't make an unjust request to the god of justice. That'd be, I mean, that's just like you're you've got it all twisted already. So I do that, and then but like on the gods that don't have like a straight up, I guess like point of view or perspective, like if you prayed to like the god of the sea or the goddess of the sea, like depending how well she likes it, if she's in the mood, if she's one of those gods that even answers, you know, she's probably more inclined to do whatever. She probably doesn't care as long as you're not like you know making the god upset, I suppose. But like as long as they're not, that realm of like they have to be this because
So
this
yours
thing
is
is
kind
that
of
way.
like
It's kind of a combination.
if they're a god of like if they're a god of a particular ideal, like they obviously are gonna have to uphold that ideal. But if they're god of something else, like
And
only
like yeah,
concerned, like the god of the forest, right, is only gonna be concerned about people preserving the forest, whether it's for a good or an evil end.
right,
Whereas a god of justice naturally can only really be served by someone who's actually seeking real justice.
right. And then in another example, I'll give you. Here, let me crack open my one. Is it towards the front? I think it's towards the front. Uh, Another thing that I was gonna mention too, which is kind of like almost a dark way to play, but like the god of death. He doesn't care, if it's murder, like murder, suicide, whatever it is. He just is that like, totally neutral. So like if you prayed to the death god, you would only pray. You only there'd be like zero intervention, I guess, because he's not. That's not his shtick. He's just in charge of maintaining the underworld, like the way I keep him. So like that's just another example of like that god would just never respond to you. You got to like go exactly
Okay.
like murder, like the murder
So
god or
for
something like that.
me,
Go ahead. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
oh no, sorry. I thought you were done. That was my mistake. I
No, no,
apologize.
I am good. I'm trying to get a book.
Yeah. So I really like your idea of like depending on the god, it's a yes, no, or maybe or no comment. Literally, the god's like, I don't really care about you because you're not a part of what I'm doing. For for me, I'm the way I built it out is there are more along the lines of you, Ed, and not having it and it's mostly because the way I set it up is the good gods have foils in the evil circle of gods. So like there is a god of generosity and there's also a god of greed. So obviously the god of generosity is not going to pick greedy people to like lead to follow them or like do their like kind of work with their purposes. So there may be some opportunity for interconflict, for example, with like let's say somebody's following the law crafter and it's knowledge law and civilization and the way they've ordered their society is like not conducive to the arts. It's a much more militaristic or simplistic. Then maybe you could have some conflict with like a follower of Sanhedrin, the architect, who's all about music and art and craftsman architecture, being like, maybe doing some Robin Hood esque things, but it's really more neutral at that point. It's not evil. So I'm maybe there's a little play, but even then, if you go too far into not allowing the arts or something, you're not really following Gilrendir. You're following, you know, mine is you could either be following like Chargoth, the Unbowing, who's the god of tyrants and domination, or Vincalar, the Chain Emperor, who's the god of slavery, torture, and forced submission. So then you're really in the evil dick anyway. So it really doesn't give me a lot to play with in that department. Um, so unfortunately, or fortunately, it's just the way it kind of worked out for me. Um, so I have a lot of flexibility elsewhere, but one of the few things I have a lack of flexibility on is kind of that because I have foils.
And that makes sense too, because like we talked about how our pantheons are sort of they're concepts, right, and sort
Mm.
of human ideals, or whatever the opposite of ideals are,
Yeah.
um, anti-ideals are sort of what they embody,
Hmm.
and it's really tough to have any sort of give in what something can represent or who can serve something that is simply an ideal or an anti-ideal, whereas um, um, uh, people who, for like I think, support the forest, or who sort of um, you know uh, support the idea of civilization, or who merely like deception, I guess, even something like that, right? Or trickery, um, or the causes of magic, right? Furthering the potency of magic, right? That if they're merely concerned with that, and that their domain on the physical world, and perhaps their power is tied to that expansion, right? If a
Hmm.
god's power is tied to uh, how the wilderness is thriving, God might be less scrupulous about who
About
they,
making sure it's protected.
yeah, yeah, about who they pick with who's preserving the wilderness. Because, like, you know, is it a zealot group that's murdering, cities and wiping them out, or is it a druid who's, taking care and protecting a particular part of the forest from poachers, right? It's like difference there. They might be supported by the same God. Whereas like, you know, justice and injustice, like that's a hard line. Like you're not gonna
Yeah,
Yeah.
have unjust people
yeah.
serving the God of justice.
And there's a weird thing here that I'm actually now that I'm looking. For some reason, the Forgotten Realms have decided pretty much every evil god is chaotic evil, which is quite wild to me. And then another weird thing is everything like the goddess of the sea, Umberly, chaotic evil, which is strange to me because the sea. I guess maybe that's their way of saying it's like she's fickle, but like they call what's not misfortune chaotic evil. Oh, god of the hunt is chaotic evil solely because I guess I'm assuming they're doing anything wild or primal or anti-civilization is chaotic, right? Naturally, and then evil for some reason. But you'd think it'd be neutral. I don't know
I actually
why.
have two beings. I because that precise issue with the hunt, I actually have two different deities in my worlds. Both of them actually. They're sort of more fey. But I have two different beings that represent the hunt. One being sort of the honorable, necessary way of hunting, and one being more kind of the brute savagery, one of which is more good, one of which is more evil. So I understand that vaguely, but something else that might kind of tie to like Umberly being the yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at the gods list right now for
Yeah,
like it's interesting here because like all of them seem to be tied to like one domain.
yeah. There's no
Um,
combinations. I was gonna ask you guys about that because you guys seem to do. I know it's for the sake of probably brevity and making your pantheons, but you kind of hit it when you were like, yeah, like people associate him with the god of the sun, but he's not the actual god of the sun. But like it is strange that some pantheons you guys have like they cover like a general, like you said, like an ideal or like a realm of like perspective instead of just like, oh, yep, this god, goddess of the ocean. That's it. No rivers, no ponds, no rain, ocean.
Yeah.
yeah,
And for me, it wasn't even just a brevity thing. It fit into my idea of these being people originally who were mortal and then became chosen. So they were chosen for a particular thing because their personality lent itself toward that thing, right? But um, it can be swayed, they can be changed. Very difficult to do by mortals, but especially changing times, seeing things that happen over long periods of time, or other gods can influence. The gods influence each other a lot in my world. So they can also change or grow or expand or contract their area of effect based on kind of what they think the best way of stewarding is for them.
it's
Um,
also like one thing that I am kind of able to do with the way my pantheon is set up is like a player can come to me and say, I want to be a cleric of this domain. Um, and like just looking at like, I don't know, like the life domain, right? If I'm looking at my pantheon, right? I, you know, you could conceive of even like, I'm trying to think here. Um, could maybe even conceive of certain evil characters being, and maybe not life domain, but certainly light domain. But like if they want to play life domain, like there's different ways of being life domain. All right, like because you, it's like okay, maybe you serve the the god of Kor the dancer, right? The god of joy, basically. Maybe you serve him, and it's like life domain. Um, uh, but maybe you want to kind of have it be more of like a I'm a healer of the wounded, so maybe you serve Selenia, right? Who's kind of one of her monikers is like the shepherdess of the lost, or maybe you're kind of more in a neutral vein of being a life domain cleric. So you serve Eldir the Blaze Eternal, who's the god of civilization, right? Or like so there's kind of a flexibility with how the domains can be applied if people serve as ideals, because you can kind of go with what makes sense, like the magic domain, or trying to think, Astra's, or like knowledge domain, right? Knowledge domain, you can kind of put up against a lot of different things, right? You can kind of restructure that in different ways. You can make it I don't remember the arcane domain wizard. I think it's just death.
For the
I could
Arcana
do
domain.
arcana domain. Yeah, I could kind of spin that any way I want, or like nature domain. It's like, is that the god of rest who kind of has this image of the stream, or is it the goddess of the ocean, the goddess of the wilderness, or the goddess of disease, right? Like if you're an evil nature domain cleric, it's like you can spin those. You have a flexibility to spin the domains. Whereas if you have them as like you have a god of knowledge, or god of wizards. Right? I'm looking here at the Forgotten Realms, like Azuth, the god of wizards. Right? It's like knowledge domain. The only ones that have, I think, there's only three. Sorry, there's about 5 gods on here who have different domain, like separate domains. The most interesting one, I think, is the two most interesting ones are the first and the last. Which the first one is Ariel, the goddess of winter, who is evil, and her domains are nature and tempest. Makes sense for wizard for winter. And then the last one is the goddess of trade, whose domains are knowledge and trickery, which is also really interesting and really funny to think about. Oh, both knowledge and trickery for trade. Kind of cool. But most of the other ones are kind of restricted to one domain, and that's kind of what comes from having set, um, kind of set structured things that they're the gods of, as opposed to sort of more. But that being said, I think we're getting kind of close to the end of our time here. I've been recording about 2 hours. You guys got
Yep,
to go
just
soon. I got work in the morning as well.
yeah, we're at an hour 52.
I also
Yeah, sorry,
For
Ethan.
sure. So something I'm thinking about, maybe for our next episode, guys, and I got my wheels spinning. Next time we get a chance to record, I think it might be cool to talk about the aspects of magic, kind of the divine magic, nature
Oh man,
magic,
I don't
arcane
I don't
magic.
have 6 hours to do that.
yeah. Jared, you
Well,
play low magic campaigns anyway. It'll take you 40 minutes.
No, I could do the whole episode in 30. I could do it under 30. It's you guys I'm worried about. I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about you guys
I
carrying it
think
on
it
for
might be
six
something.
hours.
I'll make sure to make it as brief as possible. Minimum 3.5 for me.
He
Just
said for
yeah,
me,
From just
me,
me.
just
And then
you.
you can you can use how much Ethan talks as a basis for determining how long I'll go, Jared.
I'm just gonna double it.
Jared's just gonna hit mute on his thing and just like do the dishes while we're
Yeah,
talking.
I'm just gonna walk. I'm just gonna walk away. I'm gonna
But
drop a question and just walk away for a little bit. Go do some laundry, some
I think
dishes.
that could be a fun thing to do, though.
I think we should. Yeah, that
Just
sounds
kind of
fun.
discuss those elements of magic
Oh
and
yeah.
how they sort of play into what we like to do, and just some interesting things to talk about with the different domains of magic, and what worlds look like when they are overtaken by maybe one of the particular types of magic. Could be really interesting. But that being said, I think we're gonna go ahead and sign off our episode on the deities. Hope you all enjoyed sitting in with us. Hope to see you next time.
Yeah, bye.